You don't belong here." The words cut through the peaceful morning air like a knife, shattering what should have been the perfect end to a family vacation. Patricia Henderson stood on her manicured lawn, pointing an accusatory finger at the Black family loading their SUV, her voice filled with the kind of righteous indignation that comes from absolute certainty that you're in the right. "I know everyone in this community, and I've never seen you people before. I'm calling the police right now." What Patricia didn't realize as she dialed 911 was that the calm, composed man she was screaming at was FBI Assistant Director Michael Thompson, a 23-year veteran of the Bureau who had just wrapped up a peaceful family vacation with his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage children. In the next 48 hours, Patricia's phone call would trigger a federal investigation that would expose a multi-million-dollar housing discrimination network, destroy careers, and prove that sometimes the person you target has the exact qualifications to take you down. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Pine Ridge Lakes, an upscale vacation community nestled in the mountains of Northern California. Michael Thompson, Sarah, and their kids had spent 5 wonderful days hiking trails, barbecuing by the lake, and enjoying the kind of quality family time that his demanding job rarely allowed. As a career FBI agent who specialized in civil rights violations and organized crime, Michael had learned to compartmentalize work and family time. This vacation was sacred ground, a chance to be just a dad teaching his son Marcus Jr. how to tie fishing knots and watching his daughter Amber perfect her butterfly stroke in the pristine lake water. Sarah, a pediatric surgeon at San Francisco General, had finally gotten a break from the hospital's relentless schedule, and for 5 days they were just another American family enjoying the great outdoors. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Thompson family had been coming to Pine Ridge Lakes for 3 years running, always booking the same lakefront cottage through the same rental management company. They loved the quiet mornings, the hiking trails, and the sense of peace that seemed to permeate the entire community. Michael had specifically chosen this location because it reminded him of the camping trips his own father had taken him on as a child, before life became complicated by badges and federal cases and the weight of fighting injustice for a living. Here, surrounded by towering pines and crystal-clear water, he could just be Michael the dad, not Assistant Director Thompson of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Sarah cherished these moments too, watching her husband's shoulders finally relax, seeing him laugh without the underlying tension that came with investigating hate crimes and discrimination cases across the country. Patricia Henderson had moved to Pine Ridge Lakes permanently 6 months ago, after her divorce from a tech executive had left her with enough money to buy one of the community's most expensive properties. At 54, she had found herself with unlimited time and a growing obsession with maintaining what she called the community's standards. She spent her days monitoring the neighborhood Facebook group, documenting who came and went, and building what she considered essential intelligence about the people who belonged and those who clearly didn't. Patricia had appointed herself the unofficial guardian of property values, and she took this responsibility very seriously. She maintained detailed files on rental properties, tracked the demographics of visitors, and had developed what she believed was a foolproof system for identifying potential problems before they escalated. What Patricia didn't realize was that her activities had already attracted attention from people far more qualified to recognize patterns than she was. The FBI's Civil Rights Division had been tracking complaints about discrimination in vacation rental communities across several Western states for the past 18 months. There were recurring themes in the reports: Black families being questioned by neighbors, having police called on them during routine activities, experiencing harassment that seemed designed to make their stays uncomfortable enough that they would leave early and avoid returning. The pattern was sophisticated enough that it appeared coordinated, but proving systematic discrimination in temporary housing situations was notoriously difficult. Most victims were from out of state, stayed only briefly, and had limited resources to pursue legal action against what appeared to be isolated incidents. Michael Thompson had been briefed on these patterns, but this vacation was supposed to be his complete break from work. He had left his bureau phone in the car, avoided checking emails, and made a commitment to Sarah that for these 5 days, he would be fully present with his family. It was a promise he had struggled to keep in the past, given the nature of his work, but this time felt different. Marcus Jr. was about to start his senior year of high school, Amber was preparing for college applications, and Michael was acutely aware that these family moments were becoming increasingly precious. Sarah had planned every detail of the trip to maximize their time together, from the hiking routes to the evening barbecues, and Michael was determined not to let the job intrude on what might be one of their last vacations as a complete family. The morning of Tuesday, July 15th, the Thompson family began their checkout routine exactly as they had the previous 2 years. Sarah packed the kitchen supplies while Michael loaded their fishing gear into the SUV. Marcus Jr. and Amber worked together to strip beds and gather towels, a system they had perfected over multiple family trips. They were laughing about something Amber had said about her brother's fishing technique when Patricia Henderson first noticed them from her kitchen window. She had been drinking her morning coffee and scrolling through the community Facebook group when movement at the lakefront cottage caught her attention. Through her binoculars, she watched the family loading luggage and equipment into their vehicle, and something about the scene immediately struck her as wrong. Patricia's first instinct was to check her records. She maintained a detailed spreadsheet of all rental activity in her immediate vicinity, cross-referenced with the community's approved guest list and property management schedules. According to her information, the lakefront cottage should have been vacant this week, or at minimum, occupied by the kind of guests she had come to expect in Pine Ridge Lakes. These people were clearly not what she expected, and Patricia felt that familiar surge of responsibility that came with protecting her investment and her community's reputation. She began photographing the family's activities through her window, documenting what she would later describe to police as suspicious behavior that warranted immediate investigation. Michael was completely unaware that he and his family were being watched and photographed as they completed their normal checkout routine. He was focused on making sure they hadn't forgotten anything, double-checking that the cottage was left in perfect condition, and helping Marcus Jr. secure the fishing rods in the SUV's roof rack. Sarah was doing a final walkthrough of the cottage, ensuring that everything was clean and organized exactly as they had found it 5 days earlier. This was a family that took pride in being respectful guests, partly because Michael's job had taught him the importance of maintaining impeccable personal conduct, but mostly because they were genuinely grateful for these opportunities to spend quality time together in such a beautiful location. At 9:47 a.m., Patricia Henderson made the decision that would change multiple lives forever. She dialed 911 and reported what she described as suspicious activity at 247 Lakeshore Drive. Her voice was steady and confident as she told the dispatcher that she was witnessing what appeared to be a burglary in progress. 4 individuals, she explained, were loading expensive items from the cottage into a large SUV, and she had never seen these people in the community before. The dispatcher asked standard questions about the nature of the emergency, and Patricia provided detailed descriptions of the family members, their vehicle, and their activities. She emphasized that this was an upscale community where everyone knew everyone, and these people clearly didn't belong. What Patricia told the 911 dispatcher would later become central evidence in a federal civil rights case. The audio recording captured not just her report, but the underlying assumptions and language that revealed the true motivation behind her call. She didn't report an actual crime in progress because there wasn't one to report. Instead, she reported her interpretation of activities she was observing, filtered through her preconceptions about who belonged in her community and who didn't. The dispatcher, following protocol, notified local law enforcement about a possible burglary in progress, and within minutes, multiple patrol cars were en route to Pine Ridge Lakes. Officer David Martinez was the first to arrive at the scene, followed quickly by his partner, Officer Jennifer Walsh. Both officers were experienced professionals who had responded to hundreds of similar calls, and they approached the situation with appropriate caution while maintaining open minds about what they might actually be encountering. As their patrol cars pulled up to the lakefront cottage, they observed a family of 4 engaged in what appeared to be routine vacation checkout activities. The father was securing items in the vehicle's roof rack, The mother was locking the cottage door, and two teenagers were arranging luggage in the SUV's rear compartment. Nothing about the scene suggested criminal activity, but the officers had a job to do. Michael Thompson's first indication that something unusual was happening came when he noticed the police cars pulling into the cottage's driveway. His initial reaction was concern that there might be an emergency somewhere in the community, perhaps a medical situation or an accident that required law enforcement response. It never occurred to him that he and his family might be the reason for the police presence. Sarah noticed the patrol cars at the same moment, and she felt a familiar knot of anxiety that came from being a black professional who had learned to be cautious around unexpected police encounters. She moved closer to Michael and the children, a protective instinct that had been ingrained through years of navigating similar situations. Officer Martinez approached the family with professional courtesy, introducing himself and explaining that they had received a report of suspicious activity in the area. He asked Michael if he could provide identification and explain what they were doing at the property. Michael's response was calm and measured, exactly what you would expect from someone with extensive law enforcement experience. He provided his driver's license, explained that they were completing checkout from their vacation rental, and offered to show the officers their rental agreement and confirmation emails. What Michael didn't immediately reveal was his FBI credentials, partly because he was technically on vacation, but mostly because he wanted to see how the situation would unfold naturally. Sarah stood beside her husband, watching the interaction with the practiced eye of someone who had observed Michael handle countless professional situations throughout their marriage. She recognized the subtle shift in his posture that indicated he had moved from vacation mode into work mode, even though he was trying to maintain the appearance of being just another tourist dealing with an unexpected police encounter. Marcus Jr. and Amber flanked their parents, both teenagers old enough to understand the potential seriousness of the situation, but young enough to still look to their parents for guidance about how to respond. The family presented a picture of calm cooperation, but Sarah knew that Michael was already analyzing the officers' approach, the nature of their questions, and the underlying dynamics that had led to this encounter. Officer Walsh reviewed the rental documentation, while Officer Martinez continued his conversation with Michael. The paperwork was clearly legitimate, the family's explanations were consistent and reasonable, and nothing about their behavior suggested any kind of criminal activity. But the officers still had a complainant who had reported suspicious behavior, and they needed to understand what had prompted that call. Officer Martinez asked Michael if they had interacted with any neighbors during their stay, if they had noticed anyone watching their activities, or if there had been any other unusual incidents during their vacation. Michael's answers were thoughtful and detailed, but he was also beginning to form his own questions about why his family's vacation checkout had attracted police attention. The conversation between Michael and the officers was professional and cordial, but it was also being observed by Patricia Henderson from her kitchen window. She watched as the officers examined documents, talked with the family, and appeared to be treating the situation as routine rather than the emergency she believed she had reported. Patricia felt a growing sense of frustration that the officers didn't seem to be taking her concerns seriously. In her mind, she had identified a clear threat to community security, and the police response seemed inadequate. She began documenting the officers' interaction with the family, preparing to file additional complaints if necessary to ensure that her concerns were properly addressed. Michael Thompson realized that this situation required a different approach when Officer Martinez began asking more detailed questions about their travel plans, their home address, and their reasons for choosing Pine Ridge Lakes as a vacation destination. These weren't routine questions for a simple property verification, and Michael's professional instincts told him that the officers were working from a complaint that involved more than just concerns about unauthorized property use. He made the decision to identify himself as a federal law enforcement officer, not to intimidate or influence the local officers, but to provide context that might help them understand the unusual nature of this encounter. The moment Michael presented his FBI credentials changed the entire dynamic of the interaction. Officer Martinez examined the identification carefully, verified Michael's rank and assignment, and immediately understood that this was not a typical vacation rental situation, Michael explained that he was the assistant director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, that he specialized in investigating discrimination and hate crimes, and that he was currently on vacation with his family. He also mentioned that his division had been tracking patterns of discrimination complaints in vacation rental communities, though he emphasized that he hadn't connected their current situation to any ongoing investigations until this moment. Officer Walsh contacted her supervisor to report the unusual circumstances they had encountered, while Officer Martinez continued gathering information from Michael about the complaint that had prompted their response. Michael was careful not to suggest that the officers had done anything wrong, but he did express his professional curiosity about what specific behaviors had been reported as suspicious. He explained that his family had followed their usual checkout routine, hadn't interacted with neighbors during their stay, and couldn't think of any activities that would reasonably prompt a burglary report. The officers agreed that the complaint seemed unfounded based on what they had observed, but they still needed to complete their investigation and file an appropriate report. Sarah Thompson watched her husband's interaction with the officers with a mixture of pride and concern. She was proud of how he maintained his professionalism while protecting his family, but she was also deeply troubled by the implications of what was happening. As a successful surgeon, she had experienced her share of discrimination and prejudice throughout her career, but she had hoped that their family's economic success and Michael's position in law enforcement might insulate their children from some of these experiences. Watching Marcus Jr. and Amber process this encounter, seeing their confusion and growing awareness of what was really happening, broke her heart in ways that her own experiences with discrimination never had. The officers completed their investigation within 30 minutes, concluded that no crime had occurred, and prepared to leave the scene. But Michael Thompson wasn't finished with his own investigation. He asked Officer Martinez if he could have a copy of the complaint report, explaining that as a federal civil rights investigator, he was interested in understanding the specific allegations that had been made. The officer agreed to provide the report, and he also shared his professional opinion that the complaint appeared to be unfounded and potentially motivated by factors unrelated to actual criminal concerns. This conversation marked the moment when Michael Thompson's vacation officially ended and his federal investigation began. Patricia Henderson watched the police officers leave without making any arrests, without issuing any citations, and without taking any action that validated her concerns about the suspicious activity she had reported. From her perspective, this represented a failure of the system she depended on to maintain community security and property values. She immediately began preparing additional documentation to support her complaint, including the photographs she had taken and her detailed observations about the family's behavior. Patricia was convinced that she had identified a genuine threat that had been inadequately addressed, and she was prepared to escalate her concerns to higher authorities if necessary. Michael spent the drive home from Pine Ridge Lakes explaining to his family what had just happened and why it mattered beyond their personal experience. He talked about the patterns of discrimination his office had been investigating, the difficulty of proving systematic bias in vacation rental situations, and the importance of documenting incidents like theirs to build stronger cases for civil rights enforcement. Marcus Jr. asked pointed questions about whether their family would have been treated differently if they had been white, while Amber wanted to know if they would ever be able to return to Pine Ridge Lakes for future vacations. Sarah listened to these conversations with a heavy heart, knowing that her children were learning difficult lessons about American society that she had hoped they might avoid. The official police report filed by Officers Martinez and Walsh concluded that no criminal activity had occurred at 247 Lakeshore Drive on the morning of July 15th. The report noted that the complainant had reported suspicious activity that appeared to be a normal vacation rental checkout, that the family had provided legitimate documentation of their rental agreement, and that one of the individuals involved was a federal law enforcement officer. The report recommended no further action, but it also included detailed documentation of the complaint and the officer's observations. This report would later become crucial evidence in establishing a pattern of discriminatory complaints in the Pine Ridge Lakes community. Patricia Henderson was not satisfied with the official resolution of her complaint. Within hours of the officer's departure, she had contacted the Pine Ridge Lakes Property Management Company to express her concerns about their tenant screening procedures. She argued that the company had a responsibility to ensure that rental guests met appropriate community standards, and she questioned whether proper background checks had been conducted on the family she had observed. The property management company's response was professional but firm. The Thompson family had been exemplary guests for 3 consecutive years. They had sterling rental references, and their conduct had never generated any legitimate complaints from neighbors or property managers. Michael Thompson returned to work the following Monday with a new perspective on the discrimination patterns his office had been investigating. His personal experience at Pine Ridge Lakes provided first-hand insight into how these incidents unfolded, what motivated complainants like Patricia Henderson, and how local law enforcement typically responded to racially motivated reports. He began developing a more comprehensive investigation strategy that would examine not just individual incidents, but the broader systems and networks that enabled systematic discrimination in vacation rental communities. His goal was to build cases that would create lasting change rather than simply addressing isolated complaints. The FBI's investigation into vacation rental discrimination expanded significantly following Michael's experience at Pine Ridge Lakes. His team began analyzing complaint patterns across multiple communities, identifying individuals who had made repeated reports about Black families, and examining the financial relationships between property management companies, homeowner associations, and community watch groups. What they discovered was a sophisticated network of discrimination that went far beyond individual prejudice and involved systematic efforts to maintain racial exclusivity in upscale vacation destinations. Patricia Henderson's activities attracted federal attention when investigators discovered that she had made 17 separate complaints about Black families in vacation rentals over the previous 8 months. Her reports followed consistent patterns. She consistently described normal vacation activities as suspicious behavior. She frequently claimed to have witnessed criminal activity that investigating officers could never substantiate. And she always emphasized themes about property values and community standards. More importantly, investigators found evidence that Patricia was part of a broader network of community monitors who coordinated their activities and shared information about targets across multiple vacation rental destinations. The financial investigation revealed that Patricia Henderson and others like her were receiving payments from a property management company that specialized in maintaining exclusive clientele in upscale vacation communities. The scheme was sophisticated. The company would accept bookings from all qualified applicants to avoid obvious discrimination, but they would deploy community monitors to create uncomfortable experiences for unwanted guests. Families who experienced harassment during their stays would frequently request refunds and avoid returning, effectively creating the racial exclusivity that direct discrimination laws were designed to prevent. The financial records showed that Patricia had received over $40,000 in monitoring fees over the previous 18 months. Michael Thompson's investigation ultimately resulted in federal charges against 12 individuals across 4 states, including Patricia Henderson. The charges included conspiracy to violate civil rights laws, housing discrimination, wire fraud, and racketeering. The case established important precedents for applying federal civil rights protections to vacation rental situations, and it resulted in significant policy changes at major rental platforms like Airbnb and VRBO. More importantly, it demonstrated that federal law enforcement agencies were prepared to aggressively prosecute systematic discrimination, regardless of how sophisticated the schemes might be. Patricia Henderson was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to the 43 families who had been targeted by her network's discrimination scheme. During her sentencing hearing, she maintained that she had been protecting property values and community safety rather than engaging in racial discrimination. The federal judge rejected this argument, noting that her activities had systematically targeted Black families while ignoring identical activities by white guests. The judge also emphasized that discrimination motivated by economic concerns was still illegal discrimination under federal civil rights laws. The Thompson family never returned to Pine Ridge Lakes for vacation, not because they were afraid or intimidated, but because Michael felt it would be inappropriate to visit a location that had become central to his professional investigation. Instead, they found a new vacation destination where they could focus on family time without the complications of federal cases and civil rights enforcement. Sarah sometimes wondered if their experience had cost them something precious, a safe space where they had felt welcomed and comfortable, but she also recognized that Michael's investigation had protected other families from experiencing similar discrimination. The Pine Ridge Lakes community underwent significant changes following the federal investigation. New management companies took over several properties, community watch groups were disbanded, and homeowner associations implemented strict policies prohibiting harassment of legitimate guests. Property values initially declined as the community's reputation for exclusivity disappeared, but they eventually stabilized as Pine Ridge Lakes developed a new identity as a welcoming destination for all families. The changes weren't universally popular among longtime residents, but they were legally mandated and federally monitored. Marcus Jr. and Amber Thompson both wrote college application essays about their experience with discrimination and their father's federal investigation. Marcus Jr. decided to study criminal justice and civil rights law, inspired by watching his father transform a personal experience of injustice into systematic change that protected other families. Amber chose to study medicine like her mother, but she also developed an interest in healthcare disparities and the ways that discrimination affects medical access and outcomes. Both teenagers emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of American society and their own responsibilities as citizens and future leaders. The federal precedents established by United States v. Henderson and Associates created new tools for civil rights enforcement in vacation rental situations. The case demonstrated that systematic discrimination could be prosecuted under racketeering laws, that financial motives didn't excuse discriminatory behavior, and that federal authorities would aggressively investigate complaints involving vacation rental discrimination. Legal scholars noted that the case extended civil rights protections into new areas of American life and provided a roadmap for addressing discrimination in the sharing economy. Michael Thompson was promoted to Deputy Assistant Director following his successful investigation of vacation rental discrimination networks. His work on the case earned recognition from civil rights organizations and vacation rental platforms, but he remained focused on the broader challenges of civil rights enforcement in an evolving economy. He frequently spoke at law enforcement conferences about the importance of recognizing discrimination in non-traditional contexts and the need for creative investigative approaches to address sophisticated bias schemes. Sarah Thompson returned to her surgical practice with renewed appreciation for her family's resilience and her husband's commitment to justice. She also became involved in medical organizations focused on addressing discrimination in healthcare, drawing connections between the systematic bias her family had experienced and the institutional barriers that many patients faced in medical settings. Her perspective as both a victim of discrimination and a professional committed to serving all patients gave her unique insights into the personal and societal costs of prejudice. The case attracted national media attention when it was featured in a documentary about discrimination in the sharing economy. The film followed several families who had experienced similar harassment, examined the federal investigation that exposed the systematic nature of vacation rental discrimination, and explored the broader implications for civil rights enforcement in modern America. Patricia Henderson declined to be interviewed for the documentary, but her recorded 911 calls and court testimony provided compelling evidence of the mindset that motivated her discriminatory behavior. Pine Ridge Lakes eventually became a case study in successful civil rights remediation, demonstrating how federal enforcement could transform discriminatory communities into welcoming destinations. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy, but it was comprehensive and lasting. New families began visiting the community, including many Black families who had previously avoided the area due to its reputation for hostility. Property management companies developed new policies and training programs to ensure that all guests received equal treatment and protection from harassment. The financial cost of the discrimination scheme was significant for all participants. Patricia Henderson lost her home to pay restitution and legal fees. Several property management companies faced federal sanctions and civil lawsuits, and the broader network of discrimination that had operated across multiple states was completely dismantled. The economic consequences demonstrated that discrimination was not just morally wrong, but also financially devastating for those who chose to engage in systematic bias. Michael Thompson often reflected on how a simple family vacation had evolved into one of the most significant civil rights investigations of his career. The experience taught him that discrimination often occurred in unexpected contexts, and that effective enforcement required law enforcement officers who could recognize bias even when it was disguised as legitimate concerns about safety or property values. His investigation created new training materials for federal agents and local police officers, helping them identify and address discrimination in vacation rental situations. The Thompson family's experience also highlighted the importance of documenting discrimination incidents, even when they seemed minor or isolated. Michael's professional knowledge and resources allowed him to transform a single incident into a comprehensive investigation, but most families lacked similar capabilities. The case led to new programs that helped discrimination victims connect with legal resources and civil rights organizations, ensuring that their experiences could contribute to broader patterns of evidence needed for successful enforcement actions. The lasting impact of United States v. Henderson and Associates extended far beyond vacation rental discrimination. The case established legal precedents that applied to discrimination in many sectors of the sharing economy, from ride-sharing services to home-sharing platforms. Civil rights lawyers used the case's innovative legal theories to challenge discrimination in contexts that hadn't previously been covered by traditional civil rights enforcement, expanding protections for minorities in rapidly evolving economic sectors. Years later, Pine Ridge Lakes had become a symbol of successful civil rights transformation rather than exclusionary discrimination. The community hosted an annual diversity celebration that attracted visitors from across the region, and several properties were owned by families of color who had moved to the area permanently. The change represented more than legal compliance. It reflected a genuine transformation in community values and a commitment to welcoming all families who wanted to enjoy the natural beauty and recreational opportunities that Pine Ridge Lakes had to offer. Patricia Henderson served her full sentence and was released from federal prison with a felony record that permanently affected her employment prospects and housing options. She never expressed genuine remorse for her discriminatory behavior, instead maintaining that she had been unfairly prosecuted for protecting her community. Her lack of accountability served as a reminder that legal consequences, while necessary, couldn't always transform the underlying prejudices that motivated discriminatory behavior. However, her prosecution sent a clear message to others who might consider similar schemes that federal law enforcement took vacation rental discrimination seriously and would pursue comprehensive investigations and prosecutions. The case also sparked broader conversations about discrimination in vacation and travel contexts. Civil rights organizations began monitoring travel review sites, social media groups, and community forums for evidence of discriminatory patterns, while travel companies implemented new policies and training programs to address bias in their operations. The heightened awareness created a more hostile environment for discrimination and a more supportive environment for families who experienced bias while traveling. Michael Thompson's investigation ultimately demonstrated that effective civil rights enforcement required both individual courage and institutional commitment. His decision to pursue federal charges against Patricia Henderson and her network sent a clear message that discrimination in any context would face serious legal consequences, while the comprehensive nature of the investigation ensured that the underlying systems enabling discrimination were dismantled rather than simply disrupted. The case became a model for civil rights enforcement in the 21st century, showing how federal agencies could adapt traditional civil rights laws to address discrimination in emerging sectors of the economy. Today, the Thompson family continues to take annual vacations, though they now choose destinations based on positive recommendations from other families rather than simply returning to familiar locations. Their experience at Pine Ridge Lakes remained a defining moment for all four family members, but it also strengthened their commitment to fighting injustice and supporting other families who faced similar challenges. Michael often tells colleagues that his most important case began not in a federal office or a courtroom, but in a vacation rental driveway where his family was simply trying to load their luggage and head home from a peaceful week at the lake. The broader implications of their story continue to resonate throughout American society, serving as both a warning about the persistence of discrimination and an inspiration about the possibility of meaningful change when individuals with the right skills and resources choose to fight injustice wherever they encounter it.